Like, share and subscribe. Acquaint yourself with the medieval weapons and medieval swords. We all know that medieval weapons belonged to knights who used them to fight their enemies. When going on a battlefield, it's very important for the knights to select the best weapon so that he can fight and triumph over his enemy. Medieval weapons are those weapons that the knight have used during the Middle Ages to fight their enemies. These weapons come in different shapes and designs. Some of these weapons are stronger while the others are not as strong as some weapons. During the Middle Ages, the knight using the weapons should have a fair knowledge about them and also about the strength of the weapon so that he can use the weapons in the best possible way. Medieval weapons were not only found in the European countries, but they were found in the different countries of the world. Each country has its own designs of medieval weapons, and as such you'll find that the weapons of one country are completely different from the weapons of other countries. For instance, take a look at these different medieval weapons. http://www.a2armory.com/meta.html. If you search the internet, you're bound to find hundreds of medieval weapons that were used during the Middle Ages by the knight. These weapons have their own strength and style. In the Middle Ages, only the rich and famous had the right to buy and make use of these weapons to protect their families, because only the rich could afford these weapons. These weapons are divided into two categories depending on their purpose of use. The first category of weapons was used for long-range encounters. It means that if a knight wanted to attack its enemy who is at a distance, then he can use these weapons. The second type of weapon is for close encounters, like a knife. After talking about the medieval weapons, let us take a look at some of the examples of medieval weapons. Blade. It refers to a weapon that has a flat surface and an edge that is sharp and pointed. This weapon is generally made of metal and it is used for the purpose of cutting, striking, thrusting, stabbing, etc. Dagger. It refers to a knife that has two edges and they are usually used for the purpose of thrusting or stabbing. Most of the time this weapon was used as a less important weapon for close encounters. Even in the past, these weapons were not regarded as primary weapons. They were also regarded as tertiary weapons. Sword. It refers to a long weapon that has a lengthy cutting frame. This weapon is used in different forms in different countries of the world. Ad. Society needs hunters. At the dawn of time there were two distinct types of people. Each of them was required and one was not more important than the other. The first group went out and gathered berries, fruits, nuts and grains for the tribe. The second group went out and hunted for meat. Both groups were crucial to the survival of society. Yet the skills needed to complete each task were different. Using sight and smell, taste and touch, the gatherers went about searching for food that was there for the taking. Once these gatherers learned to till the soil, they became farmers. No longer did they have to search for food. Then they became tenders of the crops, assuring that there would be food for everyone even when the hunters were unsuccessful. Hunters were different. They had no patience for tending crops and so went off in search of the animals to kill. They used all their senses, especially those of sight, smell and hearing. They were alert at all times and ready for action. If they weren't constantly searching and wary, they would lose the meal or maybe be eaten by it. How does this apply to modern times? Well, we still need hunters and we need farmers. The farmers are the linear folks. They support everything that goes on in our day-to-day life. They're administrators and caretakers. ADD people are different. More like the hunters, we're constantly looking for the next new thing. Though we're quick and smart and are able to think on our feet, we aren't finishers. We're often people who create the systems. We just aren't tenders. We might set up the systems, but without linear thinking people to maintain them, there would be no society. It's just vital that there are two types of people in the world. While people with attention deficit are labeled as such, it's only because most of today's society is based around jobs that require tending. But our ADD brains aren't built that way. If you're in a linear job and are unhappy because of it, then find another job that suits your ADD brain. Not all jobs require that you sit still and follow instructions. Try something creative like writing or artistry. Or become an entrepreneur, like I am. It's perfectly suited to people with ADD. I'm able to create projects and with the help of the linear people on my team see them through. It works out great. ADD people are also problem solvers. So find a job like being an electrician or even a CSI detective. Decide what works with your personality and your ADD. Think about what you're excited about, and when your hyperfocus kicks in, decide what you were doing when that happened. Those are the areas where you should be looking for work. Just forget the labels that society has placed on us, because ADD people aren't very good at routines. We're definitely every bit as important to the success of society as a linear thinking people. If you've a linear job and aren't satisfied, then find another job that works better with your ADD. Life can be sweet when you find the spot that makes it that way. A glimpse of the weapons used during World War II. The Second World War took place from the year 1939 to 1945, and it took place between the Axis powers and the Allied powers. This war is regarded as the worst war in history because it led to the deaths of a huge number of people. This war has seen the use of different kinds of life-threatening weapons by different countries. Given below are some of the weapons that were used during the World War II. http://www. http://www.a2armory.com/ww2-pistols.html:/bazooka. This weapon is the kind of weapon that has a lengthy metal smoothbore tube for the purpose of shooting rockets that could penetrate through the armor. This weapon was used for the purpose of short-range shooting. 60-pounder. It refers to a medium field gun that was made and used by the British. This weapon is about 5-inch long, and it was usually used for the purpose of counter-battery fire. The British Army made use of this weapon till the year 1944. Katyusha. It refers to the kind of artillery that has rocket launchers in them in place of the traditional guns. This weapon was made and used by the Soviet Union during the start of the Second World War. This kind of weapon was cheap and its production was not complicated. Gustav. It refers to an 18-centimeter Ke railway guns that were used by the Germans. It was first made during the end of the 1930s for the purpose of use during the Second World War. This type of weapon was also commonly referred to as Dora and Schwerer Gustav. Browning HP. It refers to a pistol that was used by many countries during the Second World War. John Browning of the United States created this weapon in the year 1922. Beretta Model 1934. It refers to a solid and partly automatic pistol that was used by the Italian Army for the purpose of use during the Second World War. The weapon itself was manufactured in Italy, and it was in production during the year 1934 till the year 1931. FN Model 1910. This pistol was created by John Browning and was a partly automatic pistol. The producer of this pistol was Fabrique Nationale, which is a manufacturer of weapons in Belgium. It was in production from the year 1910 till the year 1983. Vis. It refers to a single-action partly automatic pistol that has a caliber of 9 mm. During the Second World War, the Army of Poland used this pistol. It's regarded as one of the best handguns that have been manufactured. A whiff of medieval tapestries. For lovers of home decor, tapestries are an ideal choice to lighten up a dull corner, to add beauty and grandeur to a room, or simply bring forth a piece of history into their living rooms. For the latter option, medieval tapestries are the perfect choice. Medieval tapestries are those which have replications of medieval artistry and a piece of history attached to them, such as these. http://www.european-wall-tapestries.com/store/catalog/medieval_page_c_2.html. Such tapestries bring through the canvas a depiction of a scene or an artwork made famous by a medieval artist. Such tapestries go back to the Renaissance and arts and crafts times. Medieval tapestries were intricately woven on fine fabrics, primarily wool, for hundreds of years by different races and cultures. Egyptians as well as the Incas buried their dead in tapestries. The Greeks covered their walls like those of the Parthenon with them. But the credit for excelling in this work goes to the French medieval weavers, who with their exquisite work gave the tapestry a new dimension. One of the highlights of medieval tapestry history is their work in the realm of unicorn tapestries, rightly, since the unicorn has always been a source of marvel and beauty to the world. The medieval artisans, in their attempt at capturing this magical creature, have presented it in great depths and pictorial excellence, apart from giving it a symbolic interpretation. In the medieval ages, tapestries were symbols of high art as well as items for practical use. Tapestries provided privacy for beds, insulation for castle walls, and aesthetically closing awnings. Royalty made it a point to travel with their family tapestry place to place for their comfort as well as a show of prestige. Tapestries, due to their richness of texture, have always been associated with royalty. They epitomize the luxury and grandeur in their picture and luxurious feel too. European and medieval tapestries come in different sizes, shapes and colors, and a host of European weavers have shaped the design, trend, color scheme and subject matter so that the piece of work resembles that of the medieval ages as much as possible. The revival of interest in medieval tapestries owe much to the endeavors of William Morris, head of arts and crafts movement in England. It must be understood that medieval tapestries are for art lovers and collectors with a taste for history, also that they primarily cater to a selective section of people who happen to be not only art lovers but also follow history and take an interest in the different ages that have exposed various art forms. DNA left behind in space alien encounter. Some folks, skeptics and scoffers, are not going to believe in the existence of aliens from other worlds manning UFOs unless they land in their backyards and ask for directions or to call a tow. And even then, I don't know whether that would convince a scoffing skeptic. I address this issue in my new book, I Was Abducted by Aliens But They Threw Me Back, in which I make the point that if you know you've been repeatedly abducted, for God's sake, Velcro that digital camera to your wrist when you go to bed at night. Don't leave the camera behind when you, planning on tooling down one of those deserted two-lane come and abduct me because I'm asking for it highways where you'll just be begging to get swooped up by a bunch of little grey men. Why do repeat abductees always drive down deserted highways at 2 in the morning? Evidence is what's needed, even in the form of photographs. We can't just depend on eyewitness accounts for proof. I don't particularly poo-poo eyewitness accounts. It seems to work well in a court of law to send a convicted person to prison or the gallows. But this doesn't seem to fly with scientists because, well, you know how scientists can be. It's their way or it's the highway. What can't be crammed into the scientific method is nothing more than figments of us mere mortals' overworked and overcharged imaginations. The truth is that eyewitnesses can get it wrong, and often do. However, I don't see the court system throwing out using people's testimonies anytime soon. When it comes to proving Bigfoot or the possibility that humans are being taken to where no man has agreed to go before by bug-eyed aliens, science wants DNA, and nothing short of this will do. Well, move over Carl Sagan or turn over in your grave, there is DNA evidence from a purported alien encounter. Peter Corey, a Lebanese expatriate to Australia, had a humdinger of an encounter of the third kind that neither his wife nor he will soon forget. Born in Lebanon in 1964, he moved to the land down under in 1973, where he eventually met his future wife Vivian. Married in 1990, he and his wife live in Sydney and have 2 children. He owns a local business. They had their first UFO encounter in February 1988, which was nothing more, or was it, than just a simple sighting of lights in the night sky. I'm always amused when I hear about these sightings, since most of us have seen them. The things that really ring my bell are the daytime sightings with not-so-shy aliens who wave at you from their spaceships hovering just 100 feet off the ground. Now that's a sighting. Lights in a dark night sky, while interesting, are usually just that, lights in the night sky. Cowrey's experience of seeing lights in the night sky would not end with that event. In the summer of 1988, Peter had a waking or conscious experience. While resting in bed and while some relatives were watching television in the living room, Peter suddenly felt something grab his ankle. The grabbing of the ankle, according to Corey, paralyzed him. He felt his body go numb. Wide awake, he saw 3 or 4 figures in the room with him. They were dressed in some sort of hooded garb. He alleges that one or more spoke to him in a telepathic manner, urging him not to be afraid, that it would like last time. Then one of the figures inserted a long needle into the side of his head, whereupon he lapsed into unconsciousness. Let me just say, I would have fainted long before the needle came at me. Upon his eventual awaking, he ran into the living room where he found his relatives still watching television. They thought that just a few minutes had passed since Peter had gone into his room to lie down, but in reality hours had passed. The next morning, he and his wife discovered a small puncture wound on the side of his head where he claimed someone inserted a needle into his head. The creature not only paralyzed him but also took something from his head. Peter Corey had not only never heard of alien abductions, he was not looking to have one. His interests did not lie in that direction. He alleges he had had no previous contact with anyone from this field of study. It was his wife who found some information that led them to an unsatisfying association with UFO groups in his area. It was in 1992 that Corey would have yet another bizarre experience that would catapult him to contact Bill Chalker, a renowned expert in this field. On the morning of July 23, 1992, Corey was suddenly awakened to the sight of two naked, very human-looking females sitting on his bed. One of the women looked Asiatic while the other looked Scandinavian. Corey claims they looked physically perfect and very exotic. He also alleges the eyes of the women looked unnatural in that they were bigger than a human's eyes. The women, as you can guess it, forced themselves on Corey. He did resist and even attempted to bite one of them. His resistance caused what Corey describes as confusion or shock. The women promptly vanished. Corey then alleges that he went to the bathroom and attempted to urinate. It was at that point that he experienced tremendous pain in his penis. When he pulled back the foreskin to examine himself, he discovered a blonde hair. One of the women was blonde while the other had black hair wrapped tightly around his penis. The area of his penis where the hairs were wound was burning intensely. He did manage to unravel them and had the presence of mind to save the two blonde hairs in a plastic bag. These pieces of hair were actual physical evidence of an alleged alien encounter. Peter Corey presented to ufologist and alien abductee investigator Bill Chalker the first case of collected evidence of an alien abduction experience. DNA was recovered from the hair samples. A polymerase chain reaction process was done on the sample, yielding a good result. For comparisons, hair was taken from the Corey household members. The results were astounding. The thin blonde hair, which appeared to have come from a light-skinned Caucasian type woman, couldn't have come from a normal human of that racial type. Instead, though human, the hair showed 5 distinctive DNA markers that are characteristic of a rare subgroup of the Chinese Mongoloid racial type. A detailed survey of the literature on variations in mitochondrial DNA comprising tens of thousands of samples showed only 4 other people on record with all 5 of the distinctive markers in the blonde hair. All 4 were Chinese with black hair. And the findings suggest that all 4 of the Chinese subjects share a common female ancestor with the blonde woman. But there's no easy explanation for how this could be. The Anomaly Physical Evidence Group. To whom did the hair belong and how and why was it around Peter Corey's penis? Number 1 knows. But without this evidence, Corey's experience would be chalked up to yet another unprovable eyewitness account. I've often wondered whether the alien abduction phenomenon was really as well known in groups that are not particularly inclined to learn anything about this subject. You know the type one mean. There are scores of folks, some whom I know personally, who not only have never heard of or have scarcely had a reason to hear about alien abductees. They don't read science fiction they've heard of but never watched a Star Trek or Star Wars movie and would generally regard sci-fi fans. They believe only sci-fi fans have alien abduction experiences as having a screw or two loose. They just are not into a genre even remotely related to this phenomenon. I was recently at a friend's birthday party when my wife spilled the beans that I was writing a book called, I Was Once Abducted by Aliens But They Threw Me Back. The room suddenly went silent and all eyes were on me. So I took advantage of that unpleasant pause in the conversation to begin my diatribe based mostly on the evidence I was finding for the book on alien abduction. When I conveyed my personal experience with UFOs and aliens, that's when their stories began flowing faster than the beer and margaritas. I was surprised that the subject, and mind you these were not sci-fi folks, was so readily accepted and that some of them had stories of their own or those of relatives who had been experiences. Though you do read in the literature that some of those claiming to have had an alien abduction experience do have the basis of being versed in the paranormal and sci-fi literature, there are a lot of experiences who have never in their lives picked up a book or watched a Discovery Channel program on UFOs or aliens. Many alien abductees were just going along in the humdrum of their lives trying to eke out a living watching reruns of All in the Family and I Love Lucy when they suddenly and quite unsolicited have a really bizarre experience which might be the result of something out of this world. I've to admit my bias at this point. I do have a huge background in science fiction literature, science fiction television and movies, and any cable program that has this phenomenon as its theme. I not only watched them all, but I'm afraid I could give stage directions and quote dialogue for almost all of the Star Trek TV shows. That's just how into this I'm. So that's definitely something a reader should keep in mind when reading my articles and my book, which I've finished and am currently editing. However, my interest came a long time after I had become an experiencer quite against my will at a very early age. Though the Saint Star Trek series of the Kirk-Spock era began in 1966, I was unaware of this program until much later when I was in my teenage years. That was mainly because we had one television during that time and my parents would never in a million years have allowed something so vapid their view of sci-fi into the living room when there was Lawrence Welk and Bonanza to watch. I think Hoss Cartwright and Lawrence Welk were aliens. But what sparked my interest in this UFO alien question, what would set me off on decades of continued interest, would be my sightings of some very strange events which included, but is not limited to UFOs, an alien entity or two and at least two missing time events, one that took place in the 6th grade and the other during my sophomore year of college. It would turn out that all these years of watching cable TV programs on this phenomenon would begin a slow process for me in connecting the dots, so to speak, that I had actually grown up in one of the hottest of the UFO alien hotspots of the world, Area 51. And the reason I grew up there is because my father worked in the Area 51 general area. He took the very same airplane from the very same airfield that all those working on back engineering of alien spacecraft and interviewing those pesky little grey aliens went to work. We lived in Las Vegas but did spend a year in an even spookier place called Tonopah, Nevada, where my dad worked on an even more secure top secret area that was farther north of the main Area 51 site. Long before Area 51 had become a household word in the vocabularies of ufologists and abductologists, I lived there. Long before there were cable TV programs on the History Channel or Discovery Channel dealing with this issue, I lived there. Long before the term alien abduction became a worldwide phenomenon, I lived at Area 51 and had while there at least one encounter with some sort of entity as well as multiple UFO events. There's more to come, stay tuned. M16 assault rifle adoption in 1960s. So back in the 1960s, when the war in Vietnam was just beginning to escalate, McNamara ordered the weapon not is modified adopted in its current configuration for the immediate question, with all the services in spite to receive reports ratios noting several insufficiencies with M16 as a service rifle, including the lack of a chromium striped boring and the room of the 5.56, the instability projectiles of millimeter under Arctic conditions, and the fact that the great quantities of 5.56 millimeters of ammunition required for the immediate service were not available. Moreover, the Army insisted for the inclusion of a plunger forwards assistance to help to push the bolt in the battery if a cartridge did not sit in the room by clogging or corrosion. Such a device had been incorporated in the posterior versions of the R10, which also had a room chromium stripe to prevent corrosion picula. The Colt on the one hand had discussed to rifle it was a self-cleaning design, demanding little or not of maintenance. The Colt, the denominator of Eugene and the Air Force of the United States, believed that a help forwards complicated unnecessarily to rifle it and added approximately $4.50 at its cost with supply without the true advantage. Consequently, the design was cut in two alternatives: M16 of the Air Force without assistance forwards, and for the other service connects up the XM16E1 with the assistance forwards. In November 1964, the Army orders 85.000 XM16E1s for the experimental use and the Air Force ordered 19.000 more. While waiting, the Army put another project, the Small Systems of Weapons of Arms Saws, on the general needs for weapon with fire of infantry in an immediate future. They strongly recommended the immediate adoption of the weapon, so much so that they started to refer to it like M16. Later this year, the Air Force officially accepted their first group as the United States Rifle Gauges 5.56 mm M16. Respect the military like they deserve. Throughout American history, our military has been an integral part in our well-being and the well-being of the entire world. Many people tend to think that we have put our nose where it does not belong, or that we have started wars with countries for no apparent reason. However, many of the wars that we have been involved in has either protected someone that could not protect themselves or protect the future well-being of our country. No matter how you feel about a particular war or the reason that we are fighting in that war, you should always show respect to our military that is fighting there. I can remember quite a few times in our history where respect was not shown to our military. The men and women of the military that go to fight in the war don't have a choice about whether they want to fight or not. They're fighting so you and I don't have to. They signed up to risk their life so that our country can remain free and prosperous. After the Vietnam War was over, our soldiers came back to disdain and disgust from the American people. I know that the way the war was handled by our government was not done very well. I also know that many people protested the war, which was their right, but they should not disrespect the men and women who fought because they were just following orders. When the soldiers came back from the war, we should have had parades and showed gratitude to them. However, the soldiers from the Vietnam War received none of this. The reason I'm bringing this up is that we are in a very unpopular war now in Iraq, and I don't want us to allow our dislike of a war to cause us to forget about the people who are actually fighting in it. Remember, when this war is over and our soldiers come back from the fight, to tell them thank you and show the military the respect that they deserve. Terms and conditions. Legal notice. The publisher has strived to be as accurate. Don't leave before you press like button below and subscribe to this channel. As a subscriber, you will receive a new notifications every time a new video is uploaded. Good luck.